I used to believe my life was charmed, that I had found the kind of love most people only dream about. Sophie was the center of it all, my anchor, my spark, and my safe place in a world that could be cold and unkind. We met 3 years ago at a friend's birthday gathering, the kind where the music is too loud and the air smells of a dozen different perfumes. She was leaning against the balcony railing, holding a glass of wine, her laughter cutting through the noise like a melody meant just for me. Back then, I was working long hours in IT, buried under endless lines of code and deadlines. Sophie, a freelance graphic designer, lived in a different rhythm, spontaneous, creative, a little unpredictable. That difference pulled me in. We balanced each other. I steadied her when her world spun too fast, and she reminded me life wasn't just about ticking off tasks. Mark was part of my life long before Sophie entered the picture. We'd grown up in the same neighborhood, played basketball in the cracked asphalt courts behind the school, and navigated early adulthood together. Mark was everything I wasn't: bold, charming, magnetic. People noticed him when he walked into a room. I had always been comfortable blending into the background. From the start, Sophie and Mark got along well, almost too well at times. I told myself that was a good thing. My best friend liked my girlfriend, and she liked him back. No awkward tension, no forced pleasantries, just easy conversation, and inside jokes I didn't always catch. I never let myself think it could be anything more. Our life together was simple, but full. Sunday mornings were for pancakes, evenings for long walks with coffee in hand. We had dreams, saving for a house, maybe moving closer to the coast, building a life on our own terms. It felt certain, steady, like we were both rowing in the same direction, and yet small moments began to tug at the edges of that certainty. A quick smile between Sophie and Mark when they thought I wasn't looking. Texts she'd answer with her phone, tilted away from me. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was projecting shadows onto a sunny wall. But some shadows refused to fade. One Friday evening, as we sat on the couch watching some forgettable movie, Sophie turned to me with a casual smile. "Hey, why don't we invite Mark over for drinks next weekend? Just the three of us. It's been ages since we all hung out." I hesitated, not because the idea was strange, but because of the flicker in her eyes, something I couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. Still, I nodded, pushing the unease aside. "Sure," I said. "That could be fun." At the time, I didn't realize that simple agreement would open a door I could never close again. The following Friday arrived, draped in the kind of golden dusk that makes the city feel almost gentle. Sophie had spent the afternoon setting out snacks, dimming the lights, and choosing a playlist that floated soft jazz through the apartment. She moved with an ease that felt practiced, though I couldn't tell if it was for my benefit or for the evening ahead. Mark showed up right on time, a bottle of wine in one hand, and that easy grin he'd carried since high school. "Man, it's been too long," he said, clapping my shoulder before greeting Sophie with a hug that lingered just a fraction too long for my comfort. We settled into the living room, the wine flowing as easily as the conversation. The three of us traded old stories, Mark retelling some misadventure from our teenage years, Sophie laughing in a way that made her eyes sparkle. She leaned forward often when speaking to him, her voice softer, her hand occasionally brushing his arm. Each time, I told myself it was harmless, friendly, normal. Yet, as the night deepened, I found myself watching them more than participating. Mark's gaze would rest on her for a beat too long, his smirk curling like a secret only they shared. Sophie, in turn, seemed to bloom under his attention, her laugh becoming brighter, her posture more open. It wasn't overt, but it was there, a current just beneath the surface, pulling them toward something I couldn't yet name. At one point, I excused myself to the kitchen for another bottle of wine. The moment I stepped into the hallway, their voices lowered, the laughter turning into a murmur. I tried to ignore the tightening in my chest, telling myself I was imagining it. Still, I paused for just a second before walking back in. As I approached the doorway, I caught it, Mark's voice, playful yet edged with something else. "I want to suck your," his words cut off abruptly, replaced by Sophie's quick, almost stifled giggle. Then silence. When I stepped back into the room, Both of them looked toward me with expressions so neutral they might have been rehearsed. Sophie raised her glass as though nothing had happened. "You're just in time," she said lightly. "We were wondering if you'd gotten lost in there." I forced a smile, setting the wine on the table, but my mind was already unraveling the moment in slow motion. That half-finished sentence echoed inside me, gnawing at the edges of my trust. The rest of the night passed in a blur of polite conversation and empty laughter. But something had shifted. The warmth between us now felt staged, every gesture measured. By the time Mark left, the air in the apartment seemed heavier, thick with unspoken words. Sophie kissed my cheek and went to bed without another word, leaving me alone with a glass of wine and a question that would not stop repeating. What exactly had I walked in on? That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying Mark's unfinished sentence over and over until the words felt etched into my skull. Sophie's soft breathing beside me should have been a comfort, but it only sharpened the ache in my chest. The next morning, everything appeared normal, too normal. Sophie hummed, while making coffee, her hair messy, her smile warm. If she sensed my unease, she didn't acknowledge it. Mark didn't text or call, but that wasn't unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of how they'd looked at me when I walked back into the room, as if they'd been caught mid-thought and were scrambling to erase it. Over the next week, subtle changes began to creep in. Sophie stayed up later than usual, claiming she had client projects to finish. When I passed by her desk, her laptop screen would switch with a quick flick of her fingers. She laughed at her phone more often, yet never shared what was so funny. Mark, too, became harder to reach. Our usual weekend basketball game was canceled without explanation, replaced by vague excuses. My rational mind urged patience. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't let jealousy invent stories. But my instincts told another tale, one I couldn't ignore. The silence between Sophie and me began to stretch, filled with polite exchanges that carried no warmth. One Thursday evening, while she showered, I found myself standing in front of her phone on the kitchen counter. I told myself I wouldn't look, that I wasn't that kind of person. But my hand moved anyway, as if driven by something beyond reason. The messages were there, thread after thread of playful, flirty banter between her and Mark. The one from that night was almost exactly as I'd remembered. "I want to suck your," followed by a winking emoji and Sophie's reply, "Stop, you'll make me blush." Scrolling further, I found something that made my stomach twist. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night," winking face, sent just hours earlier. I closed the phone, my hands trembling. The proof I'd claimed to need was now in my possession, but instead of clarity, I felt hollow. Confronting them now would lead to denials, excuses, maybe even tears. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Undeniable, inarguable. So I decided to wait, to watch, to be certain. The thought made me feel both ashamed and resolute. If the truth was ugly, I would face it without the veil of doubt. The next day, Sophie casually mentioned she had a late meeting with a client. I smiled and told her to have a good night, even as I quietly rearranged my own plans. Because tomorrow night, I wouldn't just be waiting for her to come home. I would be waiting for the truth to finally show its face. Friday evening arrived, cloaked in a kind of quiet that makes every sound feel amplified. Sophie left the apartment in a fitted blazer, her hair styled with more care than usual, and a faint perfume that lingered long after the door closed. She smiled as she said, "Don't wait up," and for the first time, I didn't. Instead, I followed her from a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The city lights blurred past as I kept my focus on the taillights of her car. She eventually parked near a small coffee shop tucked into a side street, one we had visited together only once. I stayed in my car, watching from across the street. Minutes later, Mark appeared, dressed casually but with the kind of ease that always seemed deliberate. Sophie's face lit up when she saw him, the warmth in her smile unmistakable. They hugged, not a friendly pat on the back, but an embrace that lingered, her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. The confirmation hit me like a cold wave. My heart didn't shatter all at once. It cracked slowly. With each second, I stood there watching them lean in close, speaking in tones meant only for each other. I stepped out of my car before I could talk myself out of it. The night air was sharp against my skin as I crossed the street. Their conversation faltered when they saw me. Sophie's eyes widened, her mouth parting as though words might save her. Mark looked anywhere, but at me. "Don't stop on my account," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Sophie stammered, "Ethan, this isn't—" But I cut her off. I thought we were better than this. No shouting, no scene, just those words, heavy enough to fill the space between us. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Mark muttered something under his breath, but it didn't matter. The truth was already laid bare, and no explanation could reassemble the trust that had been broken. I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. The world around me seemed muted, the hum of passing cars, the glow of shop windows, the faint buzz of a neon sign. None of it could pierce the numbness settling in my chest. Weeks later, I packed my things and moved out. I didn't block Sophie's number, but I stopped answering her calls. Mark faded from my life without ceremony. I began therapy not to erase the pain, but to understand why I had ignored my instincts for so long. Betrayal, I learned, doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or shattering moments. Sometimes it slips in quietly through whispers, half sentences, and the silence that follows.